Hey, good morning everyone, it's TractorMan44 here. Today we're just going to make a simple two-way or centerline transition that comes in equally tapered from both sides, and when finished the real height is going to be 15.5 inches. That's what our target is. This particular furnace is going to end up setting on an 18-inch return air box because it is an electric air handler. The slant coil is in there at an angle, but it's going to require that all the air comes in through the bottom to make sure we get proper airflow the way we want it across the coil. So that's what we're going to do. Hey, another thing I want to point out before we get started, none of the videos I do are really for the actual tradesmen, people that are very knowledgeable and possibly even trained in a very competent non-union shop or a union shop at all. Simply because, like I said, there are many ways of doing things, and I really have no formal training whatsoever, except for one semester of stuff where we made an oil can or we made a little coffee pot or something like that. Absolutely no training whatsoever in ductwork or anything of that nature. So there are sometimes I get some comments that are kind of negative, concerning how come I don't use all the math and all that kind of stuff, to figure true heights and all that. It's not that I can't do it. Don't necessarily need to do it. And the people that watch my video aren't interested in me showing how sharp I am with the pencil and figuring out, all the sines, cosines, tangents, and all that stuff anyway, figuring out all that silly stuff that we need to figure out. I think what the majority of the people are that watch the things that I put up are just looking for something to demystify, what it is behind ductwork or the ductwork layout, and also just to kind of let them know that it's not really that difficult to do a fairly adequate job. Again, like I said, this is not for the professionals out there, though I do have a good complement of people that are old professionals that stop in and make very favorable comments, and I do appreciate all also. But at any rate, this is just another simple way of doing it. You can see we've got the front view shows 16-inch right here by 10.5-inch depth and a 15.5-inch true height, and though it's not drawn to scale, it's going to show an equal taper. I've got a 1/2-inch double hem flange all around the perimeter. The double hem just takes a 1/2 inch of material and folds it over to give that degree of stiffness. A single fold of the metal stiffens the metal, but it'll also buckle whenever you go to install it. The double hem has less of a tendency to buckle. A 1/2 inch double hem is going to take 1 full inch. So we're going to start off just by laying out that 1/2 inch double hem down here on the sides. We mark 1 inch, then we mark a 1/2 inch, because those are the two fold lines. Now we want to come in 16, we want a total width of 16 inches, so I've got plenty to play with here, so I'm just going to go ahead and mark me a spot right here that's well within an inch or 1.25 inches from the outside, and we're going to go ahead and lay out that center of 16 inches. And on that, because it's an equal transition, we're going to put another mark at dead center of the 16-inch mark, which is 8 inches. And we're going to square off of that and transfer that up to the center, because that's going to be our center line. Or we can merely measure without a square. We can merely measure in from the outside edge, and that's exactly 10 inches. So I'm just going to put a center line mark at 10 inches. And if you want, you can use your straight edge to connect that dot. That's our center line. Now we know 8 inches off from here's one edge, 8 inches off from there's the other edge. So now what we want to do is come to our true height, which is going to be 15.5 inches. 15.5 inches plus the 1 inch for the flange, or you have to measure your 15.5 inches from the inside scribe mark. So let's just go 16.5 inches from the outside of the metal. So I'm going to mark it here. If you have a good true square, you can use your square and lay across there. But because sometimes the edges are not cut quite true, I like to make a double mark. That's our total height. Now once we've got our center line marked all the way up here to our true height, we look at what the dimension needs to be reduced down to, and that dimension is 12.25 inches, which is going to be 6 1/8 off of the edge. So we can go right here to 6 1/8, make a mark, flop over, get us another 6 1/8. So that should double check out. If you got your 6 1/8 from here, 6 1/8 from here, that should measure out to 12.25, and this is the true height. So what we have to do, because we have to put a notch up at top for an S, is we come down off of that true height 1 inch, because we have to notch down 1 inch. We can use our square to transfer those marks down to that 1 inch line right there. Now we can connect the dots from down here up to right here, over here to up here. And no, we're not ready yet. What we have to do is we have to determine which metal we want the Pittsburgh on. Do we want the Pittsburgh on the front, or do we want the 1/4 inch on the front? So I think what we're going to do is go ahead and put the 1/4 inch on the front. So what I'm going to do is going to add 1/4 inch at the angle. And now we're ready to cut it out, notch it. This is our basic layout, so now all we have to do is come up with our notches. For minimizing distortion in your notches, I like to use the yellow straights instead of the green or the red snips. So you'll notch straight in, take the 1/2 inch off at an angle. This up here is going to have an S clip on it. Still like to dob that off at a bit of an angle right here. Remember, I just said if you have an equal transition, you can, doesn't matter if you're face up or face down when you trace it, but if you have an unequal transition, in other words, say this had one side perfectly straight and all of the angle change was on the opposite side, you have to make sure that you invert the piece in order to trace it out, or you'll end up with 2 fronts or 2 backs. And you'll find yourself having to smash it out and refold it. If you like, it's not a bad idea to go ahead and lay out your scribe marks just for the heck of it. So we will, just for the heck of it. There's our 1 inch. There's a 1/2 inch for our double hem. We got a 1/4 inch going up the side. We got 1 inch across the top for the S clip, and then another 1/4 up the other side. If you laid it out correctly and traced it correctly, your scribe lines should intersect fairly close to where you just marked the notches by tracing the pattern. And again, there's a little leeway there. There's our front and back too. Because this was the layout one, I'm going to fold this one first and we'll get our actual height. Now this is where you can use math, because you understand how to figure out, the hypotenuse of right triangles and all that kind of stuff. We can do all that, but it doesn't matter because there can be just a little shift in the metal. This is not a CNC layout. This is a handmade layout. So there can be a little shifting in the metal, just a little shift. By the time you cut a 16, 18, 20 inch line, just a little bit of a shift can result in a pretty substantial amount. So if you use mathematics in order to figure all your true length based off of what you've got drawn, yes, it's more accurate, but then again, it may not be because what you actually done by doing it by hand instead of a CNC machine comes out differently. First thing you want to do is line up and get your double hem out of the way, at least on this particular fitting. So we'll set that on the 1/2 inch mark. This is where your accuracy in your notching really comes in handy. Because there's no measurements on the back side, you have to go to where the edge of those, or the junction of those notches are for the actual measurement. So we'll go ahead and bring that up 90 degrees right there. All we have left on this is going to be the 1/4 inch bends. Now there's going to be a little bit of a wrinkle down here. There's going to be a little hickey right here because I've got this 2 inch by 2 inch, or 2 inch by 2 inch bending bar on the front of the apron on the brake, so it's standing this out, so that consequently that last little bit won't be smashed into the bending bar, but I'll show you how I fix that. So we'll take it up to 90 degrees. You've got 2 choices now because we've got this flange bent here already. You can either kind of roll that flange out and do it from this side, or travel to the other end of the brake and drop the flange off of the end just like I did up here. So we're going to do that. So we're down on this end of the break, so we'll go ahead and do the other side of this one first. Again, the more careful you are at making your notches and making sure your folds are directly on the lines, the more accurate your fitting is going to be. Remember I told you about the bending bar is going to leave a little bit of a hickey in that 1/4 inch. Anytime I go to salvage yard, I always look for good chunks of steel laying around and try to buy them back from the salvage yard as I'm turning in scrap material. And this is entirely the reason why right here. If you can see, you keep some nice sharp-edged material whenever you're laying these things out by hand so many times. You can really correct a situation so easy. The key is having some very nice sharp-edged chunks of steel. I just got this one recently. It's nice and rusty yet. That's all it takes. Now we're true all the way down to the corner. Now it's time for us to go ahead and go about the business of getting the true length, which will result once it's folded in the true height of the transition. This is where you can use your math if you so desire. I don't so desire. Always go back out, go to your layout piece, because your layout piece is always going to be the most accurate when you want to get your measurements off of it. This length right here, because it's tapered in, is longer than what it's going to be if it was straight up and down. So it's going to be nominal because there's not much of a taper on this, but it's still enough to make a difference if you're concerned about accuracy. Remember the 1 inch mark up here that we put, and also the 1/2 inch and then the 1 inch down here for the double hem? If you measure from the junction of those two marks right there, this here is going to be 14.5 inches. Add the 1 inch for the top, add the 1 inch for the bottom, and we end up with a 16.5 inch by whatever the width or the depth of the duct is going to be. Now if we're truly equal in layout, this should equal 14.5, give or take maybe a 32nd or a 16th. And it is 14 and 9/16. So this is just a 1/16 of an inch off. But we're going to call it 14 and 1/2 plus the 1 plus the 1. So our cut size is going to be 16.5 by 10.5. But because we're going to have a Pittsburgh lock on the front and the back of the side, we add 1 inch for each one. So 16.5 by 12 and 1/2 is going to be the cut size for both of these. And another thing too, whenever you lay out your metal by writing on the inside of it, it not only allows you to remember easily when you're folding it which part of it's going to be the inside, it also makes sure that you don't lose your measurements. You'll be surprised how many times that happens. And how many times you'll fold the fitting backwards because you're looking at it and you can't tell because of the marks which way it folds, inside or outside. But if you mark it, you know. And a lot of times I actually go to the point of making an eye, just an eye on the individual pieces, so that whenever I go to the break with a stack of 12, 16, 20 different pieces to fold a whole series of transitions or duct fittings at a time, you don't have to think about it. You see the eye, you see the marks, you fold it, and you know it's going to work. Now because the requirements were 16.5 by 12.5, 12.5 is 25. So if we find a piece of scrap that exceeds 25 and exceeds 16.5, we're big enough for two of them. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to lay down that 16.5 inch height. We're going to come into 12.5 inches because we know we need the 10.5 plus the 2 lock former or Pittsburgh locks. So there's 12.5. We'll do that twice. And a quick connection of the dots. A quick connection of the dot is going to render us both layout sides, left side and right side. I've talked about this before, about laying out with a big thick magic marker or a felt tip pen, whatever you want to call it, as compared to a scribe. Felt magic marker is much easier to see, much easier to follow your mark, but it's not nearly as accurate because some of those felt markers have an 1/8 of an inch mark. So by using an 1/8 of an inch, you can really vary some whenever you make your cut. Whereas you've got a scribe line off of a scratch awl, and you maintain a fair close relationship to that line, you're going to maintain a higher level of accuracy. There's our two sides. Now all we have to do is mark them. We're going to lay it out for our 1/2 inch double hem. So we're going to get 1 inch. We're going to get a 1/2 inch. We have the Pittsburgh up the side.
There's a 1 inch.
This is going to be fitted with the drives, so we still want a 1 inch mark on that end also. I'll show you that in just a second. There's our two layouts. Now that it's out of the lock forming machine, we got to go about the business of making the 1/2 inch double hem 90-degree flange that has a little bit of an angle, because remember it's a transition, so it has to have a bit of an angle to the finish so that it'll allow this to taper in to match the width of the ductwork up above where this is going to tie into. So if it's coming up at an angle, we have to correct and bend this one outward proportionate to what this bends inward, so that everything rests correctly on the top flanges of the furnace. You want to minimize the amount of time you latch down a Pittsburgh inside the bending bar of the brake, because it smashes it down, then you have a tough time inserting your 1/4 inch material into it. You have to open it up. So I do everything that I can when possible from the outside. So we're going to bring this up like this, latch it down, then we're going to go here to the, again, to our notch. We're not going to bend to 90 because we know that has to taper in just a little bit, and we're going to estimate about how far that needs to taper in. I would have a tendency to believe that that's about good enough, right about there, but it's nominal because it is adjustable. So then we bring this and bring it inward, compensate the same amount. Again, now all we have to do is go over to the cleat former, and we'll bend a drive tab outwards on this right here. Duplicate the effort on the second one. Now if some of you fellows are young fellows just getting started, you want to bear in mind, if you notice I'm not slamming this brake around, a lot of times I'll see guys get a little careless and they'll give this thing a sling and they'll just drop it down and it goes whamming in there. Well, that's really bad on the machine. It's bad on the bearings. It'll even, in severe cases, it can even flex your apron. So I really don't like to see that happen, especially on my own machinery. And there are lubrication points. You can see right here there's lubrication points. There's bronze bushings and stuff in some of these that you have to keep lubrication on. This eccentric has to have lubrication. So you want to make sure you drop just a couple of drops of oil in every now and then. Again, nominal, and it is somewhat adjustable. Now, I just talked about us having to install a cleat, a drive cleat on this right here. There's multiple ways of doing it. You can do it. There's a tool called a bar fold. It's just a little handheld tool. It's got like a 3/8 inch and a 1/2 inch indention right here. And they come in 8 inch, 12 inch, 16, and even bigger than that. And now they're making large ones that are 20 inches wide or whatever, or long, and they'll have a 1 inch on them. I don't have one of those, but you can actually take this and just slide this right on here like that, drop it down in there, and you can fold it by hand. That's one technique for doing it. When I'm in the shop, I don't like using that unless it's absolutely necessary. You will see us do this on the job when I go to install this plenum in a few days. Second thing you can do, there's a set of hand seamers. This one here was just given to me by an old fella. This is a 783 Pexto. It's an old version and a much better version of the Malco ones that I use currently. But this one here has a depth gauge on it and everything, where you can actually, if you really want to be extremely accurate, you can actually slide this to a specific depth with your ruler, lock it in place, and it'll be there every time that you slide it in on the edge of the metal. I don't necessarily use that, but at any rate, you can take the hand seamer and you can fold it a little bit at a time all the way across, then latch it down permanently. This is my old set of seamers here, and they're marked with a quarter, a half, 3/4, and 1 inch mark on the surface zone. These are my old ones. They're about 35 years old or so. They still function. They're not nearly as good as what these old timers are here. These are much more crisp. Just do a much better job. But then again, the other option, and the way I like to do it when I'm in the shop, is to use the actual cleat bender over on the wall. This has got a series of cracks in it that'll take virtually any combination of duct by shifting back and forth, any combination of duct from 6 or 8 inch all the way up to 18 inch to bend that drive tab on. So on this one here, there's no 90, so you don't have to worry about it. You can just fit this in here, and you want to rock it to make sure you feel it nice and square. If you don't have a square, your drive tab is going to be crooked. So stick it in there, rock it, pull up the top, leave it here, go down and get the second one, bring it up. As you bring it up and connect them, you want to drop that out from underneath. As you lower it down, the fingers will pick that up again, and then you can securely bend the drive tab down. So we'll do it one more time. Just make sure it's square. Sometimes it gets hooked in there, it's no big deal. Just like that. Now if you look closely, running it through that cleat bender took a little bit of that angle away, so we have to reestablish that angle. So we're going to do that by hand real quick. And talking about those hand seamers, here's a pair I bought at a yard sale one time. I think I gave a quarter for them. Some enterprising gentleman took a pair of pliers used for nipping glass and actually put 3-inch machined surface metal plates on there. And I think that was probably used again in his occupation as breaking the edges of glass and stuff off, because we had a glass manufacturing company in town years and years ago. But at any rate, these work real well for what it is that we're doing. So you just grab it right here. All it's going to take is a little bit to just kind of bring it back up. That's all we need right there. That's why I tell people all the time, keep your eye open at yard sales and stuff, and farm auctions and everything. You'd be surprised the things that you can come up with for little or nothing. Oh, there's even another thing too. I forgot this. All your big box stores sells these kind of vice grips. This is actually a vice grip brand. This is a very high quality. It's not a Chinese knockoff or a Taiwanese knockoff or anything. Whenever you latch this thing down, it's got a good grip to it. It's not as comfortable for me to use as the seamers, the regular seamers, because I've used those so much. Now, because many times you want to assemble these plenums on the job, you want to just kind of put them together temporarily and not permanently in the shop. If you like, just to double check or verify that your measurements are halfway accurate. First piece is always difficult getting in. I'll give you a tip about hammers too. You can see the beginnings. If you use an old wore-out hammer, if you take a look right here how beat over this is, that's from just years and years and years of me just abusing the fire out of it. That is so much better for assembling duct than the brand spanking new crisp edge hammers. You'll put more dents and more dimples in your finished product than you ever thought possible whenever you use a new hammer. Again, this is just I'm not bending anything down at all or whatever. I'm just setting it in place. When I think the angles, I think everything is going to work out fine. You can see how this here bent in. I've got to correct the bend up here on the top. But you can see how everything is going to work just fine. Believe it or not, I bent those the wrong direction, guys. I tell you, sometimes when you're making the videos, it's kind of difficult to keep your mind on exactly what it is that you're doing, because you're thinking about how you're blocking the video and all that kind of stuff. So sometimes your mind's not exactly where it needs to be. So I folded those in instead of out. That has to correct that angle. Hey, I was consistent. I did it on both sides too. When you use the seamers, just a little bit at a time, never a whole bunch at one time, because that's when you'll just make a real nasty bend. Now the drive tab is going to drive right down through there and attach those. I won't even bother putting this in, but you can see it's going to pop in right there. And again, don't worry about things not being true, because they will be once I'm installing. This will get secured to the top of the furnace, and it'll hold everything exactly where I want it as everything's assembled, so it will be just fine. Once you get it to this point in the shop, you can go ahead and throw your tape on it, or your folding rule on it, to make sure you've got reasonably close to what you want. We wanted, now this is bowed up a little bit, we wanted 15.5 true height. I've got 15 and 5/8. 15 and 5/8. Well, when this smashes down on the plenum, it'll be just fine. We wanted 16 inches in width across the front. I've got 16 and a 16th roughly. That's going to be absolutely perfect. We need 10.5 inches in depth. I've got 10.5 inches in depth right here. And I wanted to reduce this to 12.5 inches. So from right here to right there is roughly 12 and 5/8. So because this is actually going to tap into the bottom of a trunk line, this size here is nominal. It can go up or down easily 1/8 of an inch in any direction. So this actually turned out quite nice. It's ready to install. And I spent some time describing and explaining the notches and the reasoning behind the notches and everything today. Simply because you have to understand how you need a notch in order to where you keep the air inside the duct. You make notches too big, what do you got? You got a big old hole up here, you can stick your finger in, and you lose a lot of airflow. And you have to never, I just don't like duct tape at all, but I will use duct mastic, especially if it's a situation where I do not want leakage at all, especially if it's in a crawl space or in an attic to where it's going to be wrapped with the bubble wrap, mylar bubble wrapped insulation. I'll use that mastic, seal everything 100%, and then go ahead and insulate. But if it's exposed down in the basement, if your laundry's down there, you don't mind a little bit of leakage for the heating or whatever, so I don't necessarily do it down there. But I make very tight notches to where I have very minimum amount of leakage out of the corners. If you've got notches to where you can walk by it and you can actually hear it whistling, like an old man talking without no teeth, you know what I mean? But at any rate, you walk by, you hear them whistling like that. First off, your duct size is too small because your velocity pressure is too high, your duct static pressure is too high, and you got too big of a holes and you're actually leaking air that in such a force it's actually creating a whistle. Now, residentially, that's a bad job. Commercially, you hear that a lot because we have to insulate all the ductwork because they're high pressure. Any kind of a pinhole leak commercially, and you do hear that. And they are aggravating things to seal once you do find them. But anyway, hey, you know what? We beat this one to death, and this is Tractor Man 44, and I am out of here. We're on to the next one.